Section 10 of The Education of a Christian Prince by Desiderius Erasmus. On the occupations of the prince in peace. The prince who has been instructed in the teachings of Christ and in a protecting wisdom will consider nothing dearer, or rather, nothing dear at all, than the prosperity of his people, whom he ought to love and care for as a king and member of one body. All his plans, all his efforts, all his interest will be turned to the one aim of ruling over the province entrusted to him in such a manner that when Christ makes the final reckoning, he will win approval and leave a very honorable memory of himself among all his fellow men. Whether the prince be at home or travelling, let him imitate the famous and admirable Scipio, who said he was never less alone than when he was by himself, or less idle than when at leisure. For whenever he was free from the cares of the state, he was always going over in his mind some plans for the welfare or position of the state. Let him imitate Virgil's Aeneas, whom the wise poet depicts often turning over many problems in his mind during the night, while others slept, so that he could better look out for their interests. And these verses from Homer, these claim thy thoughts by day, thy watch by night. Rise, O son of Tydeus. To the brave and strong rest seems inglorious, and the nights too long. The general idea of which is that it is not becoming for him to whom the people are entrusted, and upon whom there are so many responsibilities, to sleep the whole night through, should be inscribed on the walls of every palace, or better in the minds of the kings. Whenever the prince travels in public, he should be doing something for the common good. That is, he should nowhere be anything but a prince. It is more becoming a prince to appear at public functions than to remain secluded. But whenever he goes out, let him be careful that his looks, his carriage, and especially his speech, be such as will better his people. He should always be mindful that whatever he does or say is observed and known by all. Wise men have not approved the custom of the Persian kings, who spent their lives buried in their palaces. They hoped to be acclaimed highly by their subjects by this means alone, that they were not regularly seen, and rarely appeared before their people, for state occasions only. Whenever they did go forth, they merely displayed a barbaric arrogance and immoderate wealth in the face of the people's misfortunes. The rest of the time they spent in sports or in bad expeditions, just as if there were nothing for a good prince to do in times of peace, when there is waiting such a great harvest of wonderful deeds, if only the prince has a spirit worthy of a prince. There are even some today who think that one thing which is most honorable for kings, that is, participation in public affairs, is unworthy of a king. There are likewise some bishops who think that there is nothing less their function than teaching the people, which in fact is the one duty for a bishop to perform, and who by some wondrous scheme delegate to others, as if unworthy of them, their especial functions, and claim steadfastly for themselves the most debased. But Mithridates, who was a noble king no less for his learning than for his rule, was not ashamed to pronounce to the people the laws with his own lips and without an interpreter. In order to do this, he is said to have thoroughly familiarized himself with 22 languages, and Philip the Macedon did not deem it beneath the position of a king to sit and listen to cases every day, nor did his son, Alexander the Great, although ambitious to the point of madness in other respects. He was said to have had a habit of covering one ear with his hand while trying a case, saying that he kept this ear unbiased for the other party. The perverted praising of princes is to blame for the turning of some so far away from these things, for the old proverb says that each one likes to employ the art he knows and avoids those things in which he realizes he has little ability. How then can you expect that anyone who has spent his first years among flatterers and frothy women, corrupted first by base opinions and then by sensual pleasures, and wasting these years engaged in gambling, dancing, and hunting, could later on be happy in those duties the fulfillment of which requires the most diligent thought? Homer says the prince does not have enough leisure to sleep the whole night away, and yet such persons as I have in mind have only one desire, and that is to while away the boredom of life by finding ever new pleasures, just as if there were nothing at all which princes could do. A good paterfamilias is never at a loss for something to do in his own home. Is a prince without anything to do in so vast a domain? Evil practices are to be checkmated by good laws. Distorted laws are to be amended, evil ones are to be repealed. Good magistrates are to be sought out, and corrupt ones are to be punished or corrected. The prince must seek out the means by which the poor common folk will be burdened as little as possible, by which his country is freed from robbery and criminals, and that which is the least but bloodshed, and by which he may foster and strengthen lasting agreement among his people. There are some other things less important than these, but not unworthy of even the greatest prince, such as visiting his cities with a mind to improving them. He should strengthen the places that are unsafe, adorn the city with public buildings, bridges, colonnades, churches, river walls, and aqueducts. He should purify places filled with deadly pestilence, either by changing the buildings or by draining the swamps. Streams that flow in places of no advantage he should change to other courses. He should let it in or shut out the sea as the need of his people demands. He should see that abandoned fields are cultivated so that the food supply is increased, and that fields which are being cultivated to little advantage are farmed in other ways. For example, by forbidding vineyards where the vine does not warrant the trouble of the farming, but where grain could be grown instead. There are literally countless activities in which it would be honorable for a prince, and for a good prince even pleasant, to engage. Consequently, he never will have need to seek a war, because of the tedium of idleness, or to waste the night in gambling. In these matters which pertain to public affairs, such as his public buildings or games, the prince should not be extravagant or lavish, but splendid. So too in receiving the embassies that relate to the affairs of his people. In those matters which pertain to him as an individual, he should be more frugal and moderate, partly that he may not seem to be living at the public expense, and partly that he may not teach his subjects extravagance, which is a cause of many misfortunes. I observe that many of the ancients fell into this error. I only wish it did not claim any victim today, of turning all their efforts to one end, namely to leave their kingdoms not better, but greater. I have often seen it happen that while interested in extending their boundaries, they have even lost what they already have. That much praised statement of Theopompus is not irrelevant here. He said that he was not interested in knowing how great a kingdom he should leave to his children, but only how much better and more secure he should leave it. And I think the laconic proverb, Sparte t'échoue par le sort, orne-la, that is, Sparta is yours, adorn her, is worthy of being engraved on the devices of every prince. The good prince should be thoroughly convicted that he can do nothing more magnificent than to hand over more prosperous and in all ways more beautiful the kingdom, whatever it may be, which fortune has assigned to him. The character of the general Epaminondas has been praised by the most learned men. When, because of envy, he had been assigned a magistracy that was lowly and commonly despised, he so conducted himself that after his term It was considered one of the most distinguished and was sought after by the greatest men. Thus he proved that the office did not confer dignity on the man, but the man on the office. If, as we have shown in part, the prince will see to those things especially which strengthen and beautify the state, it follows that he will likewise shut out and ward off those which reduce the condition of the state. It is helped by the example of the good prince, by his wisdom and his watchfulness, by the integrity of magistrates and officials, by the holiness of priests, by the choice of schoolmasters, by just laws, and by interest leading to good habits. All the attention of the good prince should be devoted to increasing and confirming these things. Harm is done by the opposite things, which will more easily be excluded from the state if we will first try to tear out the very roots of sources whence these things come. The philosophy of a good prince teaches him to be zealous and painstaking in matters of this sort, to make beneficial arrangements together for these things, and to compare all their plans for these ends in the one thing really worthy of a Christian prince. If the celestial bodies are thrown out of order only slightly or wander from their true course, they do not do it without serious disasters to mankind, as we clearly see manifested in eclipses of the sun and the moon. The same is true of the great princes. If they wander from the path of honor or do any wrong through ambition, anger, or stupidity, they cause a great deal of misfortune to the whole world. No eclipses ever brought so much harm upon the human race as the conflict between Pope Julius and Louis, King of France, which we have just witnessed and wept over.